Greetings, my fellow Marylanders. From high atop the state, I'm Garrett County Commission Chair Paul Edwards, and you're tuned in to the Conduit Street podcast, the place to learn about the policy and politics impacting Maryland counties today.
Hello, and welcome to the Conduit Street podcast. This is Sarah Sample, Associate Policy Director for the Maryland Association of Counties, and I will be your host today. So in my role here at MACO, I oversee policy specific to education, and that includes policy on literacy efforts, primarily in the public schools, but also in the broader community, like local libraries. And in Maryland, each county and Baltimore City have a library system, many with multiple locations. And while they play a role in literacy and access to educational materials, they do a lot more than loan books and give access to computers. And if you've been to a library lately, you can see how much is going on that is related to all types of education, research, and service delivery. So as these are substantial community hubs serving all types of residents, we're excited today to learn even more about the state agency that helps drive resources, engagement, and the development of these local outlets. So we are very fortunate to have Morgan Lehr Miller with us. Morgan is the Maryland State Librarian who heads up the Maryland State Library Agency that oversees the state libraries and is regularly collaborating with the local library systems that are found in all 23 counties in Baltimore City. So a very big county welcome to the Maryland State Librarian. Thank you for joining us today, Morgan.
Thank you, Sarah. I am very happy to be here with you.
Awesome. Well, we're excited to chat with you today. So I guess before we get into the nuts and bolts of all the libraries across the state and the county ones and the state ones, I wanted to have you just tell us a little bit about yourself and maybe your pathway to the role as Maryland State Librarian.
I would be happy to, because even though it was probably obvious to me my entire life, never in a million years did I think that I was going to become a librarian, let alone the Maryland State Library.
Let alone the biggest librarian in the state.
Right, exactly. But here we are today. So, growing up, I grew up here in Cecil County, which is a county that's probably a lot like most of the other counties in Maryland. It's semi-rural. It has a wonderful heritage. But, of course, as a kid here, I was always longing for the bigger world. And, by the time that it was time for me to go to college, I went to the University of Maryland, College Park. I'm a Terp.
Me too.
Oh, awesome. Very cool. I was never coming back to Cecil County, right? I'd split. I was ready to go out into the world and do my thing. And, I lived in DC. I worked in publishing. I worked in travel writing for a little bit after college and had a fantastic time. And then I got to be in about my mid-20s. And just through all sorts of circumstances, I thought, I'll move home for, 6 months and apply to graduate school. And then I'm out of there again. This was only supposed to be a temporary stay. When I moved back home, I needed a job. I needed to make some money. And the stars aligned. And I was hired to be an adult services library associate at our main library here in Elkton in Cecil County. And very, very quickly, things just clicked. All of the things that I didn't like about my county growing up, which I can say now, it was funny, it's sports are big. I'm more of a reader. My brother has his name on the sign into one of our towns for being like the Maryland state champion wrestler and all of his endeavors. But I've got my name in the library now. And but all of the things that I didn't like about here growing up, which is probably what a lot of kids have in common with the place that they grew up. I saw the library as the absolutely best vehicle in the most non-judgmental and uplifting way to transform the lives of individuals in this community and the community as a whole. And so I didn't go, and I'm still sitting here in one of the libraries that I built today. As I said, I'm moving and I don't have internet. So here I am at the library doing this podcast with you. And I stayed there for 19 years. Half of the time that I was there, I was truly blessed and honored to become the director of the library system. And we did some extraordinary things. We won the National Medal for Libraries, which is the highest honor in the land for libraries who
Wow.
are doing really, I know, I got to go to the White House, extraordinary
Oh, wow.
things in their communities. We built a really incredible library here that is just sort of a gem of the community. And I would say, best of all, for me, I just came to love this community and this and the people who live here through my intersections with them as the county librarian. When
Wow.
I any library I ever go into, whether it's the ones that I built or ran or set in foot into in any part of our state, it's like I see people of all beliefs, backgrounds, bank accounts, everything under one roof, doing a pretty harmonious job of working to improve their lives and their communities. And it really gives me
Nice.
hope when I'm in a library. So
Yeah.
about a year ago, oh, sorry, go
Yeah, go
ahead.
ahead. Well, no, I was
I
just going
was
to say that I identify with you absolutely in terms of what you're saying about like your early experiences with libraries. Because I remember, I want to say, and I grew up in Bowie, and the library
okay.
that is right next to Bowie High School. I just remember it was so big, and I remember the feeling of just sort of like being overwhelmed, but also really excited just about
Mhm.
like the potential that a library offers, in terms of access to
Yes.
information. And I remember
Yeah.
that feeling still to this day, definitely.
It's the best feeling. And I mean, it's my job. I get to do that. Life is full of potential.
Yeah.
Every
Well,
time
so
I
yeah, tell
set
us
foot
about
in.
that. Tell us about the role sort of the Maryland
So
State
yeah, so the
Librarian.
roles. So about I had been here for 19 years. Our state librarian, who was always a great mentor and colleague of mine, was retiring after 23 years. And at the time, I wasn't necessarily looking to leave my role as a county library director. I loved it. There was still lots of projects and goals on the horizon. But all of my colleagues, especially other library directors around the state, were really encouraging me to go for the big job, and I did. And so I have been at it just over a year now.
Wow.
It's There are a lot of similarities, a lot of similar skill sets and networks that I draw on from being a public library director in Maryland, but it's also very different leading a state agency and working within the levels of state government. But it's been pretty fantastic. I've been everywhere from the Library of Congress to last month. I got to throw out the first pitch at the O's game, and
Oh my
Cal
goodness,
Ripken,
that's
Cal
awesome.
Ripken was there, and he told me it was a strike, and I knew it was.
And you said, yeah, you leaned more towards a lot the books than the sports, but hey, look, that's the full circle moment.
Then it was a full circle moment. I practiced awfully, awfully hard. My brother helped me, as did my son. I did practice awfully hard. I said, man, I've gotten myself here. I cannot throw a dirt ball in front of all these people on
Yeah.
literacy night at the O's, but I didn't. The ball girl who caught it, she only had to move her glove maybe half an inch to catch it. So
Wow,
you
that's
can read
pretty
it, you
nice.
can do it. I studied up hard to do that.
Nice. See, there you go. That studying, that studiousness really played into the first pitch,
Absolutely. And
didn't
then
it?
you got to practice too, but it was
Yeah.
pretty cool. Yeah.
Nice. Well, so tell us a little bit then about the function of the Maryland State Library Agency. Is it MSLA? Is that the acronym you guys go by?
Yes. And Sarah, I would love to because most people don't realize that there is one or what we do. I think
Yeah.
sometimes when I tell people I'm the state librarian, they think that's more of like a poet laureate thing. And I go around the state and do story times. And I love to do story times. Anybody who will invite me to read, I'll do it. But I'd say we're a small but really mighty agency. Sometimes I love to say we're the most powerful agency in all of Maryland state government because we have more than 192 libraries throughout the state. We're in every
Wow.
single community. We are serving more than 6 million Marylanders in this state in really impactful ways that they want. So we're everywhere, serving everyone, which is both the challenge and the thrill of being a public librarian. So when I explain what we do, I break it into, these major categories. We work primarily to serve and to allocate funding, development,
Okay.
and policy support, but especially funding, both state and federal, to the 24 public library systems in the state. We also do that for the 3 regional library systems in Western, Eastern, and Southern Maryland. We also run the Library for the Blind and Print Disabled, which is an actual physical location in downtown Baltimore that also serves every county in the state. And I would love to tell you more about that. That's just a fascinating and really impactful program. We also run the Deaf Culture Digital Library, which doesn't have a physical footprint, but it is a digital resource that serves not only people who are deaf or hard of hearing, but librarians and the people who work in their life to support them and to promote deaf culture and awareness. We run the County Library Capital Grant Construction Program for libraries, so funding to build or renovate or expand libraries throughout the state. Mm-hmm. And then we have our State Library Resource Center, which is both a physical and digital service that provides all sorts of things, everything from programs and training and databases to public and school and academic libraries. It provides interlibrary loan service. You know, you can live in Garrett County, but I can get a book to you in Somerset County usually in about 48 hours. And it's because of that program that we run.
Wow.
They also provide high-speed internet to 15 county library systems, as well as 23 municipalities across the state. So little known fact, the Maryland State Library Agency is the 3rd largest internet provider in the state of Maryland through that program.
Wow. Did you say it was the 3rd?
The 3rd.
Wow. Oh my God.
I know, hard to believe. I mean, we provide it for everything from, Dorchester County's library system to their EMS to Prince George's County municipal government. Like I said, we're everywhere. You can't
legit.
But why would you want to?
Yeah. Well, one thing you mentioned, so sort of you have funding that you have state funding, you have federal funding. Just to give us sort of a sense of context, what's like the size of your budget annually?
Sure. Our state budget is just a little bit over $100 million. I know that sounds huge when I say it. The more than half of that is the state aid that comes from the governor's office, from the General Assembly, through the General Assembly to each of the county library systems. So most of the county's operating funds are a combination of largely local revenues. In my case, in Cecil County, it was always about 70% local revenue, usually 10 to 15%-ish, depending on the county, but that's an average. In some counties, like Allegheny, it's as much as 50% of their operating funding comes from the state. But the majority, it's usually around 15, and then other funding like federal revenues. So the majority of our budget goes directly to each county. The other portion of that runs our Library for the Blind and Print Disabled, the Deaf Culture Library. There is approximately $7.5 million of that budget that goes to our county library construction grant program, which I'm always working to get more of there, as well as the State Library Resource Center. And then just, a small portion of that, approximately $5.5 million operates the agency itself.
Well, so, I mean, yeah, you're right. When you mention 100 million,
I know it sounds.
When you put that into perspective, I think what the state budget is like somewhere between 67 to 70 billion. So, yeah, I mean, when you look at it from a percentage standpoint, yeah, you're right. It doesn't end up being like that significant of a number, especially when it starts to get whittled down across the states and like your agility with funding as it gets sort of spread around, it gets smaller and smaller, especially in the climate that we're in right now, which is a lot of things costing significantly more than they did before COVID and before some of the shifts that we had in inflation driving some costs higher. So,
yeah, I love that word agility. I think all in all, we make up 0.017% of the state's total budget. But gosh, from a return perspective, it's pretty incredible what we're able to do with that. But yeah, the majority of our budget at the state agency goes right back. It passes through us. We send out the NOGAs and it goes right back to your county.
Awesome. Yeah. So it's really like a local, like, yeah. So it's a sort of like a pass through and really does get down to the ground to do the work locally so that, the communities can sort of customize what they're looking for.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the wonderful things about Maryland libraries. I have a love-hate relationship with sort of our what we're referred to across the country. It's referred to as library heaven, just because Maryland's a great state for education. In comparison with other states, like even surrounding states, Delaware and Pennsylvania, where you don't have this county library system structure with a standardized, laws and code and to some degree
Yeah,
policy. That's great, but I think, heaven makes it sound as if, oh, everything's hunky-dory, groovy, the work's been
exactly. Yeah.
done.
We've arrived.
That we have arrived, and there's always, so long as there will be people to serve and lives to uplift and improve, we will never be done our work,
Exactly.
and that's why we love it. Yes.
Well, so you mentioned so the state funding, but then there's also sort of a federal component. Can you tell us a little bit about sort of what kind of funding you get federally, or that also might be, well, I don't know if it's up in the air right now. I know there's a lot of federal funding that is up in the air or has certain stipulations for a lot of other agencies. But yeah, tell us a little bit about your federal funding, sort of how that has gone in the past, and if there's anything sort of shifting right now as it sort of is for other agencies.
Sure. Certainly since about January, March, that's an area where you say there's been a lot of uncertainty. It's been an area within our agency that we have done a lot of strategizing, advocacy, and scenario planning around. We
Like court
received,
cases. A lot of this is going to court.
well, and that happened here too. Yeah.
Yep.
So I'll tell you the whole story. We received $3.3 million in federal funds annually. And when you contrast that with $100 million, that doesn't sound like very much at all. But what that $3 million does is some really critical things in the state that our counties, particularly our rural and semi-rural counties, which, make up the majority of Maryland counties, frankly, they would be impacted by pretty negatively if that funding were to go away. We do use a small portion of that funding, just as counties use local and state dollars to fund their operations. We, like other state agencies, use state and federal dollars to fund our operations. So I have a small staff of 33 people. The majority of them work at the Library for the Blind and Print Disabled. So some of that federal funding goes to support simply the staffing and operation of the state's Library for the Blind. So that would have a significant impact if that were to go away. We use the majority of those funds directly to support the county system. So in a multitude of ways. One, every Maryland State Library worker, in order to be eligible for the pension system and to get a pension someday, goes through the Library Associate Training Institute, which is a wonderful program for professional development that makes all of your libraries better throughout Maryland. That's funded with federal dollars. Bigger ways, every county in the state, we make available staff development grants. In smaller counties, it's difficult to come up with the money to send staff to conferences, to invest in their ongoing education and those sorts of things. The thing that I love most, I think that our federal funding does, are competitive grants that we're actually in that process right now. Competitive grants that I think you used the words earlier of making it really local to their communities. So we make an allocation of our federal funding available every year for each of the 24 systems to apply for, to do things that are, unique and customized to what they need in their communities. And we leave that up to them. It's everything from Washington County invested in bringing telehealth pods into the libraries and partnering.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And in this most recent grant cycle, we have another library system in a rural area that wants to do that, because we all know access to care, access to primary care, access to behavioral health care. It's so challenging right now. Libraries are these, fantastic community hubs where everybody is. and there's a strong sense of trust. And so in Washington County, they partnered with the local medical community to make it possible for people to do telehealth appointments with their physicians and other care providers at the library. And that's something federal funding paid for.
And that's I mean, I can understand, like, I mean, the infrastructure for something like that is you'd sort of have to have like private rooms and things, I'd imagine.
Yeah, and they're actually they're very cool. I'll take you out to or show you one someday.
I would love to. Yeah,
and
I'd love to see that.
they have them in Kent County. There's another county that has applied for federal funding to do that. Washington County has them, but they're actual these privacy pods that are, they've got the technology, the Wi-Fi, even the climate control in there to be able to connect someone. So that's really, really cool. Other things, Wi-Fi extenders, because, people throughout the community aren't able to access Wi-Fi, and the library is able to help them do that. Workforce training, AI training, programs for teens, early literacy, whatever it is in that local community that the need is, we're able to help them support with federal grants. And in, smaller communities or mid-sized communities, even like Cecil, where you don't have, lots of availability for fundraising or corporate fundraising, or, these make all the difference. So we have worked with not only our library community, but the library advocacy community throughout the state over this past year to really make it clear and take the case to the federal government, to our federal legislators, of how critical this money is. I said the funding that we receive at the State Agency for Libraries from the General Assembly for Libraries is 0.017 of the state's budget. This federal funding, and it's the only source of federal funding for libraries, it's 0.004% of the entire congressional budget.
Yeah.
So,
wow.
and look what it does. It helps people get access to the internet, access to education,
like vital things that they need. Yeah,
right.
Vital things that they need every day to thrive.
Exactly. So back in March, the president issued an executive order that defunded our federal funding body for libraries. It's called the Institute for Museum and Library Services. And at that time, some of the direct, the funding that I talked about in a few states, it was canceled immediately. And we were really concerned and just waiting for that to happen in Maryland. Well, never waiting, really actively preparing for it. Yeah. Maryland's Attorney General, along with 21 other attorneys general, did work to bring a lawsuit against the federal government to get an injunction that would, prevent this from happening and prevent the dismantling of the Institute for Museum and Library Services altogether. Absolutely, Congress can have conversations in the future, and they are doing that right now through the budget process about, to what degree they want to fund agencies and to what degree they want to invest in these programs. But what you can't do is take money that Congress has already allocated, that's already legislated, that I've already received and distributed to the 24 counties and tell them we're taking that back, for our rural and semi-rural counties especially. Like, they don't have that sitting around, and we're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars. Fortunately, a preliminary injunction was granted and has held up. We have been able in Maryland to receive all of the funding that was appropriated through Congress for Maryland through the Grants to States program, and are still continuing to be able to distribute that. At this point, the Senate has approved, fully funding the Institute for Museum and Library Services, and as has the House, but now that all, of course, needs to be reconciled, right? Yeah. So that's one thing. I mean, libraries have a way of bringing people together, and that's one of the many things that I love about libraries. But historically, and I am really glad to see that continue, that the Institute for Museum and Library Services, when it comes to federal library funding, has seen bipartisan support through this since it was established in the 90s. And I really hope we can continue that because, this would definitely have an impact throughout Maryland, but especially on the majority of counties that are rural and semi-rural and more mid-sized throughout here. So
Definitely.
that's
Yeah.
the story in the saga of federal funding.
Well, and that's a sort of a common story right now, especially, I mean, like, and I know every other day you'll see a new press release from the Attorney General and, and a group of Attorney Generals nationwide that are sort of, having to go to bat, especially for this funding that had already been allocated or was already intended to be going to, particular entities or agencies.
Yes.
And the good thing is we're starting to see that there, at least for the time being, that a lot of the funding that was either frozen or was trying to get pulled back is being required to continue. Like we just saw it with the MSDE, so the Maryland State Department of Education had
Yes.
about 200 million, I want to say, that had been like the day before I think they were supposed to start receiving installments and deposits. It got frozen at that point. And these were for really important things. Like it was adult literacy. It was summer school, like things that were, that they, in a lot of ways, had already spent the money on, at least at the time that the freeze had happened. And we did see that they ended up getting, or the Attorney General ended up getting all of the funding that had been frozen. But I think from the conversations we're having is that doesn't mean any of these agencies are in the clear for, next year and the following year and so on, because a lot of what happened with the court cases is that it was because it was already allocated and because it was already intended to be coming, it couldn't be pulled back or frozen at that time. But it does leave some uncertainty out there in the future that agencies are trying to prepare for as far as what could happen with a little bit more lead time in terms of cutting off some of that funding or diverting it. And so on. So yeah, it's definitely a story we know a lot of agencies have been experiencing, and it's tricky to deliver quality services to residents, vital services that they need when you have sort of that sort of volatility in terms of what's going to pay for these services.
It is. I think you were all going through that. It was a scary, scary spring, I will say. And the conversations that we were having weren't ones I expected to have in my first year as state librarian. I think that that through that and imagining, frankly, everything from worst case scenarios to contingency plans, it also helped us to come up with a lot of, creative ways to look at moving forward. New efficiencies, looking at new ways of that, fortunately we haven't had to go to, threat level midnight plan. And I hope we don't in the future. But, as you say, it's, if that were to happen in all states, but I think especially Maryland, it would have a significantly negative impact on the state and a really negative impact on the majority of the counties here, all of them. But like, especially I come from a county that, Cecil County, we have 100,000 people here. It's not the biggest county. It's not the smallest county, but it would hurt us if that happened.
Yeah, absolutely. It ends up hurting the ones that have the least amount of resources that they can sort of rely on or go to. And that's particularly the case for county governments when it comes to sort of the amount of agency we have with our own resources that we're able to collect locally. But, as this is not unknown to most people, is that county governments typically don't want to get unfunded mandates because we want to have more self-determination locally. And that's something that, it's going to happen from time to time. And there are some things that we're able to sort of stave off for a period of time. But another thing that's been happening more recently is sort of these cost shifts to county governments to pay for certain things that we don't actually have any control over. So that's sort of like the local agency that we have in terms of self-determination with our funds is actually getting whittled away even more while we're having this funding volatility from a federal standpoint. So it's a precarious time for, obviously with libraries, but a lot of different agencies when you're trying to provide services to residents.
It truly, truly is. You take that and then you take things like inflation and, just all of that. And, I think libraries are, you mentioned earlier, yes, there's the things that people have always associated with libraries, literacy, books, access to reading and information and education. And that's always going to be one of the core things that we do. And nobody does it like we do, or as expansively as we do. But I've always said that, libraries are a people business. And hey, that's why we've been around since the Great Library at Alexandria. I mean, we've always kept pace, and also I think also been out about 10 steps in front of the people that we serve because we have to be,
And I feel like that's a great segue to like services that are exciting, because I feel like there's a lot of doom and gloom to talk about in terms of the budget. But like you
Oh
mentioned, so many
yeah,
exciting services like workforce development, AI training. So from a
yes.
more positive perspective, maybe share with us a little bit about what are some of the services and exciting things that are driving sort of more people into local libraries or new audiences into libraries. Are there things
hmm
that are really just exciting people?
Absolutely. Well, certainly AI, and there's so much to be said about AI to
I
talk
know.
about with AI. And that is one. It's like, it's sort of, I've been in this career long enough to start to see the cycles. It used to just happen with like politics and funding, but now I'm seeing with technology too. When I first started working in libraries, it was, the dawn of the internet. And I guess that's how old I am now. And really, for the first time, people accessing, not only getting access to it, but meaningful access. So when I first started out as a part-time, library worker in Cecil County, there were people who had never sat down at a computer before, let alone gotten an email account or, went on to apply for a job. And so much of, I feel like, what we were doing at that time with the communities, with learning how to use and access the internet in a meaningful way to amplify their lives, also learning to use it in a way that, it didn't get them, swindled or misinformed, is what we're doing now with AI. So at the state level, both in terms of the education and training that we've been putting out for library professionals across the state in, public school, academic libraries, but also the sorts of, local grant funding initiatives that we've helped to make possible. We're doing a lot of the same things there. And this is an area where I feel like we've got to be, at least 10 steps ahead of where the public is, because the majority of people in the community, we're who they come to and they say, what does this mean? How do I use it? Can I trust what I'm looking at? So, libraries, librarians across the state are really working hard and have been for a few years now to put that into what we do, for all ages. And it's not just, people who, are senior citizens. We want to make sure that children and teens, especially, understand what they're working with, are able to recognize what's AI and what's not, to question AI and to use
It's
it in the most.
tricky.
Oh, it is so, and getting harder every single day.
Exactly.
I took an online quiz recently in the New York Times. Can you guess which news story or video is AI and what's not? And it's really, it was hard to
Yeah.
do. So this is an area, particularly when it comes to information access, information literacy, that I see and am positioning our agency and our libraries throughout the state to really shine. Workforce development, which also connects to AI. That's something that in a whole multitude of ways, from the resources we provide online, to the work that we do with youth and helping them to start to envision and imagine, their future selves and their careers, to the different tools and partnerships we have in place. Libraries have always been, at the helm of. I think we're really good too at yes, there's the college pathway, but increasingly so, there are so many other pathways, apprenticeships, all sorts of things that we're really working and partnering, with other community members and education providers around to help connect teens with. When I
Yeah.
ran a public library system there, especially in this kind of community, every day there were hundreds of teenagers at our libraries. We don't have rec centers everywhere, a ton of after school programs. when school is out, the library is in, be it after school or during the summertime. And we make really good use of that time to impact teens and to, help open the doors of imagination and learning that, might crack open a little bit at school and at home. But there's just something different about being in the library, as we
Yeah.
started out with, help them do that.
And you're right. Like when you mentioned sort of the workforce development boards, I know that a piece of the blueprint is sort of collaborating with workforce development boards when it comes to middle and high school career counseling. And it's interesting. Yes. So there's sort of a web of, you've got the community colleges, you've got the libraries, you've got the public schools, and you have the workforce development boards that are like all coming together to sort of help spearhead and drive and create hubs for some of that service offering, basically, for students that might be interested in a less traditional pathway and maybe don't want to, go to college, or maybe need ideas about, what might speak to them if something isn't already in terms of a career. And that's when you talk about imagination, I think sometimes your imagination can take you so far, but sometimes seeing is believing. And when you start to have someone who understands these kind of things and is able to talk to you a little bit about your interests, they might be able to start proposing things that were never even on a kid's radar, and then all of a sudden a light, or a spark is lit, and it just sets them off on a trajectory. And so, yeah, I imagine that the collaborations amongst those 4 agencies right now is probably pretty substantial because of a lot of blueprint rollout.
Yes, you said that beautifully. I read a piece of research years ago that that young people, especially in the teenage years, they need someone in their lives who is not a parent and not their teacher to help them do sometimes it's a coach, sometimes, it's, a pastor. A lot of times it's a librarian. That's
exactly.
awesome. It's pretty awesome.
No, that's
you also use Hub too. And I think that, all of our libraries throughout the state, more and more, and what libraries are becoming in communities are these hubs and gathering places. Look at me today. There is no place else that you can go. Even Starbucks is going to make you buy a cup of coffee eventually. Yep. There is no other place that you can go and just be, but, work in a study room because you don't have internet at home yet. Meet with people, run your business. The study room that I'm in here at the Northeast Library in Cecil County, it was actually built as part of an incubator space because we have so many small business owners and aspiring entrepreneurs in this county who need a space that's not their living room to go work. So this is part of a whole cluster of rooms here that are designed specifically for aspiring and startup business owners to work and run a business. But I think one of the wonderful,
invaluable resource. Especially if you're trying to minimize overhead. It's so hard to start and run a business when taking on overhead, and especially in this climate financially. And something like that would be godsend.
Exactly. Well, shameless plug, I will say, I'm looking at it right now from where I'm sitting. We won a Mako award for it. It was probably 3 or 4 years ago. It was the Rural Champion of Innovation Award for this space and for all the services that we provide to the small business community. So I 100% agree with you. Yeah. I think, libraries as hubs too are, in any community, but especially in communities that don't have as many resources, because of our physical infrastructure and the fact that we're open evenings, weekends, open to everyone. It's a wonderful place. And I would, suggest to county governments and county departments and entities thinking of it for community members to access you and to interact with you. Most libraries are pretty cool places to go into, when people want to be there. People don't always want to walk into the county government building. Yeah. No offense.
No, that's fair. So, I walk into a public library in Anne Arundel County, and there's podcast hubs, and there's sort of there was a gaming tournament happening. It was there was so much cool stuff, and I'm that would be a little cooler than the county government.
Right. And so what we've seen, there's a hook here. So what we've seen and what I really love is the way that Every library system in the state does this. They work with their county partners to invite them in to connect with citizens. Sometimes that's in doing town halls. I
Yep.
know some libraries have been bold and brave enough to host community forums for county government about rate increases when it comes to electricity.
Yep.
The other things, legal aid services offered in libraries, that's so critical. Social services. Baltimore City's Enoch Pratt Free Library System has an incredible program called Peer Navigators, where people who are in recovery or are struggling with addiction can meet with peer navigators in the library and get connected to a whole host of other services. And so from the macro to the micro, I would just invite and challenge, county leaders to think of of our libraries as places where they can interact with their community in really meaningful ways. And I'll throw in there, because I have to and should, that and they should also support and fund them to do that.
Yeah. Well, and I think more knowledge of what's working there, I think helps them realize how they can leverage sort of what resources and entities are available to do certain things in the local community, rather than, like, so often sometimes you'll see that this can happen at a state or local level, or even the federal level, is that you've got someone who's really excited about spearheading this new thing, and I've seen so many instances where there are 2 or 3 things already established that are trying to do the identical project that person is trying to get off the ground, and for whatever reason or not, then maybe those ones didn't work, but you see that a lot, where it's sort of like trying to create something new when there are already really valuable things established that could be leveraged to use in a different way. And I think as far as when it goes to elected officials locally, when they're putting their budgets together, that knowledge is absolutely power when it comes to sort of how certain entities can provide services for residents, especially when you talk about sort of the cross agency stuff. And I know with in some jurisdictions, local health departments are collaborating with their libraries, and the local management boards that do a lot of services for children, youth, and families. Like, that is the exact kind of place that you'd be able to have a collaboration. And so I think you're absolutely right. Like, when it comes to making sure these things are funded, the knowledge piece is so important for them to understand what they have and how it could be leveraged more depending on funding availability. And I think that's definitely a starting point.
Yes. Yeah, the library is always a starting point.
Yeah, I love it.
No matter what you're going to do, start here.
Exactly. I love it. And obviously, at Mako, one of our major things is a substantial portion of our work is legislative advocacy. So when it comes to MSLA, like, do you guys have like a legislative agenda that you put together ahead of session to sort of advocate on behalf of what libraries need, or policy changes or things like that?
Yeah, we work very closely with the governor's office in the early, over the summer, and taking a look at what those things might be. And they give us some good direction there. We also work really closely with all of the public library administrators throughout the state. So, sometimes it's a policy thing. In the past, there was the freedom to read policy that was prior to me coming into this role. Building lifelong learners was another policy issue from a few years ago that, now Senator Elfreth worked to make sure that, borrowing was fine-free for minors in Maryland. A lot of times it comes down to funding as well. That's kind of where we are. Last year, we had 2 bills passed that I was really excited about, that were more agency bills and not necessarily Maryland at large bills, but that will have impact on Maryland at large. One was to bring about to slightly increase funding for our deaf culture digital library, and I'm really excited to be putting that into place this year. The other one that I'm really, really excited about is something that it was our family literacy program pilot. We're working on this in partnership with the Department of Labor, as well as the Department of Public Services, or to Public Safety and Correctional Services,
Nice.
to create a pilot program where incarcerated people throughout the state, many of whom are parents, will be able to receive some literacy support and instruction. 70% of people who are incarcerated are illiterate or can't read at proficiency. There's a strong correlation between, this is why it's so important, and a big conversation we're having in the state right now around literacy, and a place where the library systems beyond this have a huge role to play in developing that ecosystem. But anyway, there's a strong correlation between literacy in third grade and whether you're going to go on to graduate high school and whether you're going to engage in criminal behavior.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Well, yeah. And that's so important because the connection between literacy and successful reentry for an incarcerated individual is very significant. It's their access to betterment and having basically things that if you did something criminal, these are the things you wouldn't want to lose. Like you have more at stake because you've been able to sort of develop these interests and these sort of goals. And that is such an important thing when it comes to citizen reentry, 100%.
Well, and it takes it a step further too, because in addition into that, then we work with them to help them read and record books for their children. So then
I saw this. That's amazing. I was so excited when I saw that. But sorry, explain it. Yeah.
No, sure. Oh, I love your reaction to that. We just had another really great planning session next week. We're getting ready to launch the pilot. And so that the incarcerated person's child will then receive this recording of their parent reading a book. I mean, how awesome is that? Reading a book to them. And they'll also be connected with their local public library system for the whole vast array of supports that they can offer that family. So that's, an example of legislation, like the really feel good kind that reminds me every day why I got into this in the first place.
Yeah.
This year, though, probably for the legislative session, we're focused more on dollars. The two big things, our State Library Resource Center, which I mentioned before, they provide resources not only to public libraries throughout the state, but school and academic. They also provide all of that high-speed internet throughout the state. They've been flat funded. We're really working to try and get some additional funding for the State Library Resource Center. But the biggest one, by law, I mentioned before, the state aid that goes to each county system. At the end of fiscal year 2027, every year there's that formula, the per capita increase. We'll reach the end of the per capita increase cycle. And, unless we are able to work with the General Assembly to start a new cycle within the realm of affordability for Marylanders, I totally get, the state funding is going to be flat for the foreseeable future. So I know that's a long-term strategy, but something that we'll be working with each of the county's public library directors to advance, over the coming years, is being able to sustain and increase, the state share of funding for public libraries at the local level.
Yeah. And I will say, going into 2026, I think, just from a political perspective, it is an election year. So while there is just a significant need financially for a lot of different agencies, particularly in this financial climate, that's another thing that a lot of advocates are contending with is how much legislators want to do in a year when they've got an election coming up in the fall. And so it's unfortunate, but that's the reality of the situation. I mean, that's sort of the climate. And we're talking about that internally, like constantly when it comes to the things that, what's viable in terms of funding and what are some creative ways that we can try to fill gaps here and there. But yeah, I totally hear you. Funding is a big thing for everyone coming into 2026.
And beyond in this state too. Though I'll say I've never seen anybody invest in a library and not get a fantastic return.
Yeah, the ROI there.
The ROI, I mean, look at that. And like I said, 0.017%, and look at what it's doing throughout the state, nobody cares about nobody cares about people's problems and the community's problems like a librarian, and will just go to the ends of the earth to help them get what they need, which again, that's why I've been at it so long.
Nice. Well, we're very lucky to have people like you in the role. Absolutely. Well, and before we wrap up, we're going to take it old school, and I want to ask you a question of what is your favorite book or your favorite book right now? Go back to the old school library with books.
And there you go is my question. That's the question, is like, what is my favorite book right now? Because, I love potential. I'm an optimist and I'm always open to opportunity. And I say, if I pick a favorite book, then, and I won't be able to, then that's so finite and I won't be able to
do it, to be honest.
Right.
That's why it's got to be right now.
Right. So I feel like my favorite book right now is whatever book I'm reading. I get so fully immersed in it. And I'm always reading like 10 billion different things. I've been reading David Rubenstein. He did a really great book recently where he's interviewing scholars about different presidents and their presidents that you haven't heard so much about. And this is also another one of the plights of being a reader is that one, you will mispronounce words, like because you've just read them more than you've heard them. So I went around for most of my childhood saying, I've been misled instead of misled. The other thing is you read so many books, you forget the title, but I just looked it up.
Yeah.
The Highest Calling, Conversations on the American Presidency. And that's, one of our great Marylanders, David Rubenstein wrote that. And I'm really enjoying that.
We're going to put that in the show notes then as a required reading. Before we sign off, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. This has been great. This has been so informative. This is really, really useful information for our county professionals and our county electeds in terms of understanding exactly how some of the local agencies work and what kind of partnerships are happening and what kind of potential there is for even more. So thank you so much for being here.
It's absolutely my pleasure. And anyone who wants to talk more about partnership at the county level, state level, agency, I'd love to talk with them.
All right. So for our Mako audience members, if you like this episode, then please be sure to subscribe if you have not already, so that you'll be notified of new episodes as they become available and you won't miss a beat. You can also find updates on the Mako Facebook page, the Mako X account, formerly Twitter, and the Conduit Street blog. So we will leave it there for today and look forward to bringing you more episodes in the future. For Morgan Lehr Miller, this is Sarah Sample signing off, and we will talk to you soon.